As a scholar of ancient languages, I've long been fascinated with the question of the ultimate origin of human speech. I don't believe in a literal Adam and Eve in a Garden of Eden, but that story does hold the truth that humankind had a beginning, and it even preserves ancient cultural memories of human origins. Adam is described as giving names to the animals, meaning that he had language. The book of Genesis describes all humans after the flood as speaking one language. And in the story of the Tower of Babel, Genesis states that God made people speak different languages to stop their progress on that tower. And after people began to speak different languages, they then spread out over all the face of the earth. I believe that the story of the Tower of Babel preserves an ancient cultural memory that is corroborated by archaeology and science. A recent academic article found that languages have fewer and fewer sounds in them the farther away they are from Africa, the place where humans originated. Languages in Africa have many more consonants in them than languages spoken, for instance, in the Pacific Ocean. And the conclusion is that all languages must share a common point of origin. Furthermore, the article suggests that the origin of language may have been what then resulted in the rapid explosion of humans across the globe, just as the story of the Tower of Babel asserts. Now, it's true that humans in Africa have dramatically more genetic diversity than those outside of Africa. And the reason for this is simple. Within a population of, say, 1,000 people, there is a certain combination of genes. But if 100 people out of that 1,000 leave the group and travel to another area, they take with them just 1/10 of the genetic diversity of the whole group. And if that 100 expand into a population of 1,000, and then 100 of them leave to migrate somewhere, that 100 take with them an even smaller fraction of the genes of the original group. Now, the article on language I referred to concludes that that's the reason languages far from Africa have fewer sounds. It concludes that the simplification of sounds was parallel to the reduction in genes. I believe this article's main conclusion is correct. The fact that languages have fewer sounds in them the farther away they are from Africa does indeed prove that all human languages have a common point of origin, and that point of origin is in Africa. But I'm going to suggest that there's another reason this is true. Let's go back to how those early humans migrated. Let's imagine there's a tribe of people, say 1,000. They all speak a language they mutually understand. And then 100 people leave to migrate somewhere else. That 100 take with them all the sounds of the language. Yes, they're taking away only a fraction of the genetic diversity, but not, of course, a fraction of the sounds. Linguists know that, if anything, a small group of people that leave the main body are more likely, in fact, to preserve the original and ancient forms of a language. And that's because the original base of a language, where most people speak it, is where mutations and changes come about and then spread throughout the whole population. So if anything, the small number of sounds far away from Africa is evidence that the original language, spoken tens of thousands of years ago, had relatively few consonants in it. After people migrated away and traveled thousands of miles from the original group in Africa, that original people there in Africa expanded the number of sounds in their language. And the people who left Africa didn't inherit those later changes because they had no further contact with our ancestral homeland. So, to get a window into the original human language, the last place you'd want to look is where language first developed. Africa is where the vast diversity in language should be expected to leave little trace of the original forms of speech. What you'd like to find is a group of people who left Africa very early and then have lived an isolated existence ever since. And amazingly, such a group does exist, and those people are the Aborigines of Australia. An article published recently analyzed the DNA of a 100-year-old hair sample from an Aborigine man in the western desert region of Australia. And the results showed that this man's ancestors separated from the populations of Africa 70,000 years ago. We know from archaeology that the ancestors of the Aborigines arrived in Australia 50,000 years ago, and since that point, they had no contact until modern times with other humans for tens of thousands of years. Now, languages evolve over time, such that even basic words can be replaced or change enough that they no longer resemble the words they originally came from. As an example of what can happen, let's look at a group of languages we know are related. On the basis of similarities of sounds and words, linguists have been able to prove that languages such as Latin, Greek, English, Russian, and many others all descend from a common ancestor that was spoken maybe 10,000 years ago. And they call this hypothetical ancestor proto-indo-european. Let's look, for instance, at the words for mother in several Indo-European languages. There is a remarkable similarity in the sounds used. The Latin word is mater, the Greek word mitir. English has mother, and Russian has mat. But now let's look at the word for blood in these same languages. The Latin word is sanguis. Greek has haima. The English word is blood, and the Russian word is krov. So languages we know descend from a common ancestor can all have entirely different ways to express a basic word. And this happens because languages do, over the course of time, replace even basic words. And if you compound this by tens of thousands of years, it is very possible that all languages do descend from a common ancestor, and yet not one single word from that original language has survived in a language spoken within recorded history, let alone still spoken today. In this video, I'll explore the possibility that, against all odds, a trace of the original language spoken by our earliest ancestors can be recovered from within the languages spoken today. I'm going to find basic words that are similar in 3 language families that don't otherwise have provable connections. The 3 language families I will study are the Pama-Nyungan family of the Australian Aborigines, the Indo-European family, which includes languages such as English, Russian, and Latin, and the Semitic family, which includes Hebrew and Arabic. When demonstrating relationships between languages, linguists look for regular correspondences between sounds. And so, for example, Latin initial C corresponds to English initial H in several words: cordem, heart; caput, head. So if we can find words common to Australian, Indo-European, and Semitic that show us regular correspondences, we may see evidence for the proto-human language. I decided to start with the word that should be the most important basic concept that the first humans to leave Africa definitely took with them: the word for fire. In Western Desert Australian, the word for fire is waru. The English word is fire. What do they share in common? A consonant followed by a vowel followed by an R. Now, English fire is descended from the same Indo-European ancestor as the Greek word pur. And when Greek has a P at the beginning of a word, so does Latin. The Arabic word for fire is nar. Again, we have a consonant, a vowel, and an R. So it may be that all three of these language families have preserved a trace of the original human word for fire. Sadly, it's possible that in this particular case, they have done just that, but no other trace of the original human language has been preserved. And if that's true, then no one should be compelled to believe that the similarity between these three language families here is anything but a pure coincidence. It would be nice to find another example of a word that the humans who left Africa would have had. And it would be nice if that word began with a W in Australian, a P in Indo-European, and an N in Semitic. If we had that, it would go a long way toward proving the survival of proto-human words to the present day. When looking for connections between these three language families, we must limit our search to words that could have existed in the proto-human language. It would be pointless to compare the words for wheel, since presumably early humans didn't have any. There is, however, an intriguing similarity between these three language families and some words for birds. In Latin, the word for sparrow was passer, but the Latin word for ostrich was passer marinus, which shows that they used this word for larger birds as well. The Arabic word for eagle is nasr, and the Western Desert Aboriginal word for eagle is warlawuru. Interestingly, these three words show us the correspondences we saw with the word for fire. A P at the beginning of the Indo-European word, an N for the Semitic word, and a W for the Australian term. And all of these words additionally contain an R, and two of them contain an S. It would be extraordinarily nice to find another basic word between these three far-flung language families that shared similar sounds. What other concept might ancient man have taken with them when they left Africa? How about the ultimate human destiny, death? In Latin, the word for dead is mortuus. The English word murder is probably related. In Arabic, the word for dead is mate. And in the Pama-Nyungan language Nganyatjara, the word for dead is miri. I must repeat that all living languages are the product of constant change, and that even if all languages descend from a common ancestor, it is possible that no word of that common ancestor survives today. Or maybe, from what I have demonstrated in this video, from the moment humans first left Africa, they carried with them the word for that most primal, Paleolithic wonder that changed our lives, fire. And just maybe, what we call it still today in English, is an echo of the word used by our earliest ancestors. In my book, Original Thin, The Paleo Diet in the Bible and Ancient Literature, I go into much more depth about how ancient texts such as the Bible have preserved deep cultural memories of the Paleolithic period. I also discuss there how our earliest ancestors ate and why eating that way today can help us be healthy.